Oh, good afternoon and welcome to the SMPTE webinar. Today we have Mo from Evertz. He's going to discuss our current industry trend, working from home, working remotely, and how to produce events from home. With that being said, Mo, take it over.
Thanks, Mark. Again, thank you everyone for participating on this. Again, this is some very interesting times for the industry and some interesting challenges that we've been able to address pretty quickly to be able to handle things from home. Thanks, Chuck, for the invitation and opportunity to present to the SMPTE crowd here in the Philadelphia region. So one of the big things here is really focused on, and we'll just cut to my presentation here, is really looking at part of this is the redefinition of remote from home. I think there was a lot of things that happened leading into this or sort of in the first early days of the pandemic and trying to get facilities up and running and then being able to monitor it and watch what was going on. And now I think what's going to happen out of this pandemic is going to be a sort of a reinforcement of those technologies, because the general feel from what we see in the industry is that the world's going to change, and the way we do things, the way we handle things is going to change, and having that ability to do things from home is going to be more important than ever. So I'll cover a couple of things. One is going to be more of a very quick and a very easy way of getting things to the home for your engineering staff to monitor and look at what's going on. Second is to look at the extension of what's happening. So essentially, this is more conversations we've had with our customers and saying, what else can we extend out to the remote operator or the operational staff at home, with them giving that same look and feel of what they would have actually on the desk. And last, what are the other pieces that we're going to start to see evolving over the next year or two? I think that really will define what we mean by remote production. I think there is a sort of an assumed definition, but I think that definition has changed a fair amount. So we'll get through this, and I'll try to keep it a decent pace. I know there's a Q&A section on the side, so ask your questions along, and I guess, Mark, you can ask me or interrupt me as we go. So so one of the things here is that we want to take a look at some of the available tools that were out there. One of the things in this case we have, just to talk a little bit about a piece of technology, is the Atom Box. And what's interesting about this particular device, it was really meant and started off as a recorder device where you basically feed an SDI signal in, you've got a USB, you record it, basically take your content and walk away. But what we found is that there's actually an encoding component to this that we really could leverage and that we have been able to leverage for the work from home environments, in which we're able to take outputs that we have within the environment in our facility, and we've brought that to the home, and we've done that in a very different or very many ways and be able to do that. So from this perspective, it's a streaming encoder. So basically, you've got the ability to do RTSP over HTTP, DCP, or UDP, RTMP, RTMP, as well as HLS. And in fact, there's one piece here that I forgot to mention, but there's also SRT. And again, those are very valuable mechanisms to carry the video signal from your actual facility to where you want to watch it or view it remotely. It's basically a high quality H.264 encoder, and you've also got that additional value add of recording and such. So someone could record what they're sending out, or if they're at the home sending something back into the facility, they record that at the same time. So let's just kind of take a look at some examples of what that actually means. So from the very basic element, the ability to take a look at a multi-view or look at your critical signals that are coming out. So these could be your master control signals that you want to see. You've got a couple of multi-viewers that you want to see from home to make sure you've got content in a signal going out. In this case, you can take the output of the multi-viewer, plug that directly into this Atom Box, and it'll stream it out across the network. And you can connect through that through typically either a RTMP connection through your VLC, or an SRT, where you've got a bit of encryption and a secure transport across that network. So if you had a software SRT decoder, you put that in there, and now you can actually connect to the stream and see in real time what's going on. So that certainty of what's going on your facility is perfect. This is a great application. So it's not so much just a matter of one or two signals. I can take my full mosaic from a multi-viewer. So when we start to see that for sort of the smaller stations, you're looking at a couple signals, the atom box becomes a very nice little aspect to it. If you're looking at higher density signals, there are different choices there. Again, the whole concept here is the ability to make these streams available across the network and available to cross either a dedicated network or through a public network, and the ability to actually stream them on common platforms or look at them, whether it's VLC, YouTube, looking at it through potentially Teams, if that's your workspace environment, as well as Facebook Live and others, right? And again, a lot of the components we're talking about here in terms of the Atom, potentially some streaming technology that we've got for higher density, 4 to 8 signals or 16 or more signals, with the ability to have SRT. And I think that's the other big part here is the need for a secure transport, whether it's SRT, which is that open specification, or RIST, which is something that's being done within the VSF group to basically bring that signal in a secure manner and reliable manner from one facility to your remote facility or remote operator station. Other elements are, taking advantage of things that may be built in to your multi-viewers. For example, there is an IP-based multi-viewer that we've got as a MVIP2. In this case, we output the stream back into a facility, distribute that to the screens. There is the ability to actually take that output and make it available on a HLS stream, so you can actually view this on YouTube or your VLC. So that again is something that's there that can be leveraged to, again, for your mission critical multi-viewing of your signals. And again, this is an IP-based multi-viewer. Now, for larger facilities, there's probably a lot more signals that you want to be able to monitor, not only just from a mission critical master control perspective, but potentially if you're doing live production, maybe your studio, your news studio, or your production, your sports, not your sports, but your some of your daily shows or your sort of other shows there. You may have multiple sources or multiple streams in which you're already distributing them around, whether it's over 2110, whether it's over a compressed format, HL64 MPEG-2, and you just want to be able to make those streams available and selectable. Again, that's where we start to look at some more advanced platforms of extending your facility and routable parts of your facility so that the operator can now take the streams and route any of those sources to those streams and make them available across, as I said, the common platforms, whether it's VLC, YouTube, Facebook Live, Teams, or whatever. And again, leveraging either RIST or SRT in that case as well, or more commonly RTMP or RTMPS if you want to go that way. So that's one way of looking at, that's kind of what we've been seeing a significant demand for, is ability to quickly monitor my mission critical signals. The second part is the actual ability to get controls. And this is really where, we got to be able to, I think this is probably one of the biggest shifts that we start to see within from this pandemic, is this acceptance to now use software interfaces. I think we're going to see a lot more of this sort of as a new norm. The ability to, I have a physical panel, but I'm going to need a software equivalent to be able to do stuff. And what we've seen is something like our traditional 3025 master control, which is basically a very hardware-based control surfaces, which is very popular amongst a lot of station groups for that very traditional switching and everything else. But that ability to kind of take over if automation may fail, you have that same ability. You don't lose any, you don't sacrifice any functionality by now having that very software equivalent here with the software version, as well as being able to connect to your facility using something like our Vue. This is where I think this is where we're going to see a significant shift in the industry from what we see as a traditional, I need to see all my hardware-based panels and everything else, to something that's software-driven, and taking advantage of that software-driven approach. In our case, we've got what we call Vue, and what Vue is essentially the ability to kind of tailor your interface based on the role that you've got within the facility. So you can have an engineering view in which you've got all the controls that you need from an engineering perspective. I may have a TD or a technical director perspective I need to look at and the tools that they would need for that. I may have a QC perspective. So there's varying ways and different roles in which you can now tailor that interface. And what you see in this case here is just an example of a very a software-based panel that we've basically connected into the facility, or we basically run an instance in the cloud that connects into the facility and basically allows any operator from anywhere to connect and control different aspects of the facility. So in this case, this is the Vue software looking at that, but we extend that out. And that's really where I think the next conversations we've had in the last few weeks with operators is the ability to have more controls, because as they're starting to realize that first wave, we need to get on air. We need to stay on air. We need to have all the tools to maintain our signal going out. The next phase, which is now going, okay, well, this is going on in another month or two. We need to be able to continue to produce. How do we produce content while still maintaining social distancing, while still working from home? Which means I need a little bit more than just software controls in terms of turning things on and off. I need to be actual visualize things. And that's really where we start to see this evolution to more of an advanced control and basically having what we call Vue Anywhere, the ability to extend more than just control interfacing to that. So what this does is Vue Anywhere basically allows us to control and monitor any remote or any facility remotely over a network, whether that's a LAN network, a WAN, or a VPN. And so this gives us a lot of versatility. So in one sense, I can look at saying, hey, I want to create a more distributed facility once we go back. So you know what? Have these things connected to your LAN. I can now geographically space my operators instead of having them confined into a central control room, splice them across multiple locations within the facility while still producing that one show. So take advantage of my LAN environment to do that. The other aspect is I can then extend that to the WAN or the VPN. And the key part here is, and what we're finding is this is again that evolution of I got things working one way, but now I really need to have something a little bit more reliable, more low latency and everything else. This is where the ability to access your system through a web browser and not having a third-party desktop sharing software, for example, TeamViewer or Teradici or something along that line, in which I'm sort of scraping the interface back out. Here I've got a direct interface and I'm getting not only the controls, but now visualizing my images in low latency. And that's the big thing here is we're giving you that experience of being in the control room, but now being able to do that in a room next door over the LAN or in another at home from over a WAN connection. And that's kind of one of the big things there. So high level, what this actually means is that all the elements I would have within my facility are now available through this interface. So again, this is that whole reshift or rethinking that we're going to start to see within the industry of workflows and how things are going to be interacted after this pandemic. So, I know that there's been this transition to IP, and one of the things that has always been the big conversation about IP is the switch fabric, whether it makes sense for IP to be within your facility, what are the control systems and everything else. But this is really where, the ability to redefine what your workflows is, that's really the power of IP, as well as these software interfaces that you're now going to see come out into the space, is that ability to really give me a lot more information without that physical limiting control surface I may have on premise. So in this case, what you see here is I have access to all the different pieces within my facility, access to all the different hardware pieces. And in that case, sort of right here, all the hardware pieces here, I also have the ability to take any video signals that are there, collect them into a Vue node, whether it's on-prem or off-prem, and basically browse and create different work surfaces from any location using a common browser. And that's kind of key, and the latency and the aspects of that is very important there. So let me do a quick demo and show you what we mean by this. So I'm going to connect to a system here that we've got, and I'm going to go pop this up, and here we go. So hopefully we can see that screen. I'm going to go ahead and log in, just log into our screen. And as you can see now, I'm connecting directly into my interface here. So this is kind of that element I talked about earlier, in which I can now define different roles that I have within the facility and give them the different layouts or tools that they need to accomplish that role. So here's just an example of what we've got here, in which I've got maybe a master control, I've got a technical director, and I've got QC control, right? Those are different pieces, different functions within the facility. So one way that I may have been able to do this was simply just give them a very traditional router panel look and feel. But now, if I go into the QC, I'm actually extrapolating a whole bunch of other tools here. So what you see from this perspective is a lot more functions that you wouldn't necessarily have been able to do unless you had a couple of different control surfaces sitting in front of you at your desk in the studio or in the production control room. So for example, what we see here is you've got a number of channels that I can control. I'm bringing in my Tektronix Prism output so that I can actually use this as my waveform monitoring aspect. I've got the image here, and again, I can select between a couple different channels to see what's going on. Okay, so I've got channels 1 and 2. Go back to channel 1, and if I need to do any kind of procking, I can go ahead and make the adjustments. And you can see, and it may not come across as smooth, but what I see here is it's a very smooth transition to make the adjustments here. So this is kind of what you're starting to see in terms of that real-time access, that really ultra-low latency control. And that's really what we see as kind of the next real demand, is not so much just a sort of taking a multi-viewer in one stream and then having the control and trying to deal with this. This is all being constituted through that view node that's sitting there and being able to present it as one unified interface that's all tied together from a perspective there. And again, this is just an element where I can also see my, my different channels. I can select between the different channels, start to proc and control those ones. Again, you've got a bit of a hue control here and things like that. Go back to channel 1. And have all those different layouts. So that's an example of the extensions of what you can do from a QC perspective and such. So if I go back to my context, and let me go to the technical director. So in this case, I have the TD, right? So, again, I've got a couple different things from a TD perspective. I can go into my switcher. I can go ahead and look at what my switcher layouts are, and I can go ahead and select and maybe assign those different ones to the different switchers. So again, I've got my switcher layout here. I've also got potentially some router controls. Okay, so again, I can take a look at particular destinations, right? Take a look at that, take a look at a particular source, or maybe go back, right? Maybe I want to take a look at a particular record channel, and I want to bring in a particular REMI feed, and go ahead and take REMI feed there and do the take and have that take happen for you. Going back to those typical procking controls here, again, you can see that we've got the sort of real-time feel of that procking control. So I'm not sacrificing anything here, and that's really kind of the next step of really extending the controls. So really what you want to accomplish here is bringing the control room to the home, right? And that's really what the big aspect here is, that I could be sitting here working on this as I would be in real time with it. And again, if I go to the multi-viewer perspective, I can change my multi-viewer walls, look at the different layouts, I can route to those different multi-viewers. Even if I had a control room, okay, let's go in the control room and I want to be able to, control remote some of those cameras, okay? I've got that ability with the camera control. So in here, we've got our little lab. I'm looking in here. I'm also got some different camera controls here for looking at what's going on outside of the lab. So have those controls. Again, giving that information, giving the tailored functionality to the operator in a meaningful manner. Again, that waveform monitor tool, okay. Network monitoring, so let's see if this one is still working. Oh, okay, hopefully. Here we go. So again, I can take a look at, my particular systems here. I can also take a look at what's going on, the health monitor, everything else. So again, I'm getting all the tools that I need from a singular perspective. Whereas in a facility, that might be across multiple surfaces, multiple display screens, and everything else. And then even here, I could even build a very quick multi-viewer wall if I wanted to see what's going on. So that's kind of the versatility of what you have with Vue Anywhere, is that I'm getting that look and feel of what I would have within a control room, but now I'm being able to access that anywhere. And anywhere means within the facility over across a LAN network, as well as potentially across the LAN and everything else. And I don't think we've got the master control set up in here. So that's kind of like a quick, overview of what we mean by Vue Anywhere and that ability. And so what I see here is kind of the, if we go back to here, what this means from a, just a picture perspective. So here I've got my facility. I've got all my equipment sitting here, whether it's Evertz equipment or third-party equipment, SDI, IP, doesn't really matter. I can extend, my connection. So in this case over here, from this perspective, over here, oops, so if I go back, so here, this LAN connection basically allows me to do social distancing of multiple functions within my building. So again, I can move my team around, spread them across, and enforce that social distancing policy that may be intact for a while. I can have that same operator maybe work from home. Okay, so have that connected through a WAN or a VPN. They basically are controlling everything from home. Think about it from an OB environment in which I need to maybe expand, get away from that constraining environment that I would find in an OB truck, again, utilizing a LAN connection to expand on that, or even in a venue, right? If you've got some venue systems doing the same thing. So very simple tool here that extends that functionality that you find within Vue, but able to do it over very simple IP networking and things like that. So to me, that's kind of the big next step that we start to see is what more interfaces, what more controls can I make available to these quote unquote remote operators, whether they're in the facility or across the LAN. So the other aspect is really starting to think about this next shift in terms of remote production and everything else. And then what we see here, and I think that's one of the things that has definitely come out of the last month and a half of conversations with end users and things like that, is that definitely mindset that it's not going to be business as usual coming out of this. I think the days, especially in some of these larger cities, of bringing hundreds of people into a central location is something that they may want to look at avoiding, having a minimal amount of crew coming in, but even having people contribute as much as they can remotely from home, or maybe remotely from different aspects within the city and things like that. So what are the sort of evolutions of tools? So, some of the things that we start to see is that, we know that we've been able to do linear playout, and that's been something that's been proven many a times, and some of the things that Discovery does, some of the things that Warner Media is doing, Fox and a few others, in terms of linear channel playout in the cloud. I think they've taken advantage of that. But the next step is really more on the production side. And we've heard this term remote production, and there is a sort of a predefined, or what has been a initially assumed definition of remote production, but that's kind of evolved, I think, out of this pandemic. So what are the building blocks here? So first and foremost, in this case, we've got sort of, let's just say, Dreamcatcher as your production tool. I'm going to skip through this here. What we need in a production environment is you need capture, you need the ability to do slow motion, potentially replay. Definitely need a playout component here. The ability to do live editing and highlight packages, quick turnaround, as well as the video and audio mixing, right? So in this case, one of the things that we've got is the ability to move to a software-based element. So, traditionally in a particular case with Dreamcatcher, that's the family of production tools that we would have. That has always been a sort of approach where it wasn't a single box approach. It's always been that we want to have a software element and we want to run it over what we would provide as generic hardware. And that's basically allowed us to kind of create this approach of, this fundamental approach of having a cluster of nodes that software is running and that it can scale up or down based on demand. This is an example, what they do with, for example, with the NBA. Again, what's the NBA? The NBA is that they do a sports league that have number of games on different nights, so they can scale up or down the size of the system based on the number of games they handle on a per night basis. And that's kind of some of the fundamental pieces you need to really start to move away from things that are fixed function, that are on-prem, to stuff that's more generic, either on-prem or off-prem as virtual services, and potentially a private cloud or a public cloud. So that versatility is really what we're starting to look for when we start to look at these next tools that are occurring for remote production. So you want to have something that is completely separated from the sort of the hardware from the software, that gives you the versatility of doing things like a replay. Oops, go back. Things like replay. Okay, so you can do replay, I can do production, I can do live edits, and I can also do a Bravo. And we'll talk a little bit more about Bravo as my full AV sort of video audio mixing production switcher kind of functionality. So again, you want to be able to change the personality of your system based on the event that you're doing. And that's the kind of elements that you need to start to factor in this whole transition to remote production. And again, it's not just simply a scale of a sporting event, but it's the ability to go from a sporting event to an award show or an event, a live event, maybe a town hall type of event, to something like a news event or something like that. So that versatility is really what we're looking for. And that can only happen when you start to take the approach of a separating the software from the hardware approach. When we talk about Bravo, we start to look at the next step. So as we saw with Vue and consolidating the tools to help the operator do the task at home or at hand, whether it was the QC, TD, and something, and engineering, whatever, Bravo is the same thing. What you'll see here is the interface into Bravo is based on Vue. And again, these are just layouts you create to allow you to now operate a production with one person, two people, four people, whatever size you want, but giving them the tools to make that high quality programming happen with minimal interference or sort of a minimal amount of people on it. So in this case, you've got the full blown video audio mixing capability, you've got graphic capabilities, you've got replay, the ability to template out a show and then kind of run through that. Again, it's all about optimization, changing that workflow again to create content more efficiently, and the ability to do it from anywhere. And that's the other key point, is that you want to be able to really start to look at how do I make the workflow of producing content more efficient so that I don't need to have maybe 10 or 15 people in one room to produce it. I can do this from maybe 4 or 5 people collaborating over a shared resource across an on-prem or off-prem resource and produce that same show. So that's kind of the sort of the shift in thinking that we're starting to see now coming out of this pandemic. It is really the sort of the previous rules don't necessarily apply, they need to be refined. So here you've got just an example of just kind of the checks you've got there. So the ability to take in inputs and outputs, doing replays, clipping, having some NDI capabilities and such. So those are just some of the functionalities that this platform gives you. And again, it expands that family that we talked about in terms of just having replay, ability to edit content as it comes in, create highlight packages, and then do the full production play out from there, while still working within my existing workflow. And again, we're starting to see a lot of these pieces moving into a virtual environment. So being able to connect that and then kind of streamline that overall workflow is going to be key here. So what you see here is kind of that shift, right? So we moved away from everything kind of connected on-prem to now something that is completely virtualized. Again, the ability to connect it. So that's kind of the first step, right? Is the ability to now have my core technology, the ability to separate that from dedicated pieces of hardware to run them as software elements into in a cloud manner, whether it's on-prem or off-prem. So that's that shift from building very dedicated pieces that has to have people on site to utilize to now something that's a little bit more versatile and more flexible. The second part is you still gonna need some element on-prem in terms of maybe remote production at the venue or at the different venues. You're gonna still need some level of components to bring those signals into your central hub or into the cloud. And that's really where something like a virtual platform that gives you the variety of the ability to handle a variety of different signal types is a powerful element. Okay, that versatility of being able to handle any type of event of any scale as well as any signal type. So even having that sort of versatile Swiss Army knife at the edge is going to be important. So like what we have here is a Scorpion, where I can take 12 gig, 3 gig HSDI, I can take AES, MADI, I can take AES67, Dante. I can output it over dark fiber if I wanted to, if I've got that dark fiber connection, or I can carry that over a 10 gig, 25, 40 gig, 100 gig interface, or I could carry it over a 1 gig link with some compression components to it. So that versatility based on the application is an important thing, to take the signals from the remote venue and bring them in. So again, that's kind of a very powerful building block. The other concept that becomes very important is the ability to have dynamic processing capability. So it's one thing to have the ability to support physical I/O, but the other part of this is the platform to be able to have a versatility to change processes based on what you need it to do. So I may need some frame syncing capabilities. Well, I want to be able to spin up some services for that particular event to do some frame syncing within that platform. Or I may want to simply do some HDR to SDR conversion, or I want to do some encoding, decoding, right? So again, that versatility of being able to change the personality with these granular processing modules that are all software-based or software as a service mode, again, extends on what we saw with the Dreamcatcher as an example, where we took processing away from the hardware. Same idea here. I've got a generic FPGA blade, and I've got different software services that run on it. So not only have a versatility within my core in terms of the facility with sort of something like that Dreamcatcher platform, now right at the edge, I've got that versatility in terms of leveraging very programmable FPGAs at the edge. And again, the platform gives you that whole ability to fit any type of application, whether it's strictly a transport, remote production type of thing. So again, having that versatility opens up a whole bunch of different options for you that may not have been, again, looking at ways to minimize your exposure to potential future pandemics, and as well as minimizing potentially the staff that you need to have on hand, while kind of being more efficient with your overall production workflow. One of the other big things here, and I think this is really the biggest component of piecing everything together, is how do I get things in? How do I get things into the cloud? How do I get things? How do I handle live events with ultra low latency, even if I have to use compression? So I think this is one of the things that's sort of, I think, a key component that we're starting to see we'll start to see more so coming out of the pandemic, when we start to roll in live sports, live events, live sporting events. What we've seen with up till now has been a lot of news, local news, and I think there's been a sort of a new baseline that's been established in terms of accessibility over quality. It's been probably the big aspect here. Having the ability to access people and bring their video phones, whether it's a webcam or things like that, just get it into the program and assemble it. Whereas on the sporting side, you're still going to have the high density of cameras. You can still have those events where you have 20 to 30 cameras, high quality cameras, high frame rates. So those are still going to be elements that are required. But now it's how do I handle that in a more remote or virtual environment? That's where things like JPEG XS really becomes part of the conversation. I know when we start to think about the sort of the local news, you see a lot of NDI in that space now. You start to see a lot of H.264, MPEG-2. But on the other side of it, again, this is where we see the big difference between the different types of production. You need to have that high quality. I think there's been a number of events that we've seen over the last month or two where people were looking at the quality. They accept it in terms of my local news and such, but they are not accepted within the sporting event. So high quality codec it's still going to be something that's needed, and really low latency. So how does JPEG XS? That's something that's been coming into the industry over the last year and a little bit. How does it stack up against maybe some of the existing stuff? So when you look at things like TICO and JPEG 2000, what you see is a sort of a more efficient codec in comparison to TICO. More efficient code are probably less efficient than JPEG 2000. So with JPEG XS, you probably get about 8:1. TICO, you get 4:1 compression, and JPEG 2000, you can get up to 10:1 if you wanted to. And all three are visual lossless, so that's actually a way, and all three of them use wavelet technology. It's really about the latency component, right? So now this is where you start to see JPEG XS separate itself from JPEG 2000. Basically, when it comes to latency, you're talking the TR01, VSF TR01 specification in which you've got ultra low latency, which is a field, whereas in both TICO and JPEG XS, you're looking at lines of latency. In terms of the codec, this becomes a very important part because I need to have the versatility of being able to run this in a software or hardware application. What you see with JPEG 2000, it's a very high compute, very intensive codec. So you see a lot more hardware-based codecs and high density versions of this than you see the software. There are software versions, but it's not as efficient. Whereas JPEG XS and TICO are very efficient, and that's where you start to see the ability to deploy this in not only hardware-based applications, I can run them as software elements on-prem or off-prem elements as well. Your bit depths are there, and the big thing here is a certain standardization. So with JPEG 2000, you've got the VSF standardizing on this. JPEG XS, you've also got a standardization, whereas TICO is still somewhat of a recommended, or is a SMPTE RD33, which is the registered disclosure document. So when you think about why XS, and I think this is that big conversation we're starting to see with a lot of the bigger sports production teams, it's visually lossless, as I said, 8-to-1. You can package this or bundle this in a 2110. So 2110-2022 defines JPEG XS as the compression codec to carry that. So I can feed this into my existing 2110 infrastructure, or I can still use it as a JPEG or carry it over TS. And that's the work that's being done within VSF, is to come up with a specification similar to TR1 for JPEG 2000, is the same one create a similar one for JPEG XS. It's extremely low latency, so this is key for for some of these events, especially these live events. Low latency. It's light codec. As I mentioned earlier, it's super. It doesn't utilize a lot of CPU, so therefore I can deploy this across multiple places and get significant density. It allows for virtualization. I think that's the big part, as you saw with. We talked a little bit about the Scorpion on the edge, having versatility and the ability to virtualize or spin up services on the edge, as well as within the actual core technology, as we saw with Dreamcatcher. JPEG XS is that pipe that connects these different things together. It's been optimized for 4K. Again, maybe not necessarily of a choice of format within the local environments, but for a lot of the major sporting events, 4K is the common interface or the common production format. We can carry that as a single raster instead of multiple rasters. Multiple signals in a 21 or in a JPEG 2000 environment. I can take it as a single raster, carry that across. Again, it's been designed for low latency applications. And again, it's been optimized for the last piece, FPGA, CPUs, and GPUs, which is very important for productions that we want to move towards in the cloud. So for example, for us, this is an extension. We've invested heavily in JPEG 2000, so XS just becomes an extension on that offering. This is where we start to see that versatility to utilize it. So previously you saw that as a license that you can apply on a hardware-based encoder decoder on-prem. Here I've got that ability to create that as a software-based encoder decoder in the cloud, leveraging something like, for example, 3482. But the other key component with this is not only are you leveraging JPEG XS, but I'm also taking advantage of SRT or RIST to be able to bring the signal in over that as a secure link and be able to process that. So that ability to handle the SRT or RIST transport protocol is important when you're going into the cloud. Again, higher density. Again, this is one of the things about the aspect of it is how do I lower the cost per codecs? That means how do I get higher density within the hardware performances? For us, as we looked at JPEG XS, we see this as a full-out solution across multiple products. So it's not simply an encoding, decoding aspect. We see it as parts of the pieces of it you would need for production. So the ability to feed into a multi-viewer, have it on the edge device. So again, that's Scorpion, the ability to take those versatile signals, carry that across, encode them as JPEG XS, either as 2110-22 or 2022-2. Feed that into my playout chain, so take JPEG to XS streams directly into maybe my playout chain with Overture RT. Feed that in as a production chain, so maybe have Dreamcatcher on the roadmap to ingest this natively, so I don't have to have a constant encode, decode, transcode mechanism. I ingest it natively from the remote site. So again, allows us to redefine how we do live production, especially when you think about 2110 and kind of connecting multiple remote sites to a central location. How do we build a studio? So again, the low latency allows us to do a lot of versatility in terms of building a studio and looking at ways to kind of take advantage of the, maybe 10 gig infrastructures more so than building a 25 gig. Video editing, we see a lot of the editing tools taking JPEG XS as a native format. And the fact that it's a lightweight CPU, GPU weight codec, that whole process and ability, or the ability to put it into a cloud. So what does this mean? So we go back to this picture and we see that from a remote side interaction, from a interaction side, my operators are working remotely with Vue Anywhere. They're connecting through either a WAN or LAN. But if I throw in my 2110 or my JPEG XS, I can now start to get into what we see as the traditional remote production. So in the top case here, I've got, connected to a remote venue, connect to JPEG XS. This is what we see as the current defined method of remote production. You bring the signals in and you basically produce it. The other side of it is if I'm an OB truck and I need to get more resources, or if I have to connect it, I can use JPEG XS to connect an OB truck to my central facility, share those resources across that as another way of doing it. One of the other elements you see that got added onto this picture was the, in this case, the Dreamcatcher Anywhere. Okay, so again, here is where we start to see an extension, taking advantage of the Vue Anywhere, but now making Dreamcatcher Anywhere with Bravo and the remote, is I can now remotely control this Dreamcatcher cluster from any venue, whether it's on venue or in the broadcast center, and remotely control that from an operator's perspective. So that's the extension of Vue Anywhere. It becomes DC Anywhere, Dreamcatcher Anywhere. So a replay operator can do a full replay control using not only the remote control, but also visualizing all the other assets and things like that from home connected to that. So that's kind of the extension of one version of remote production, but that can change, right? So let me just go back here. Erase the link. Okay, so what happens now? So the next step is really start to leverage this model, okay? So what we start to see now is, again, this discussion of we don't want to continue to put more stuff in a single facility. We want to distribute that. We want to be able to distribute that utilizing on-prem or off-prem cloud services and then tie them together. So what we start to see now is we're seeing a lot of conversations here about shifting away from an on-prem environment to something that may be cloud-based. As we said earlier, you can do the playout perspective. That's been done. A lot of companies have already moved towards that. Discovery, Fox, Warner Media, a lot of them have moved a lot of their channel playouts into the cloud and taken advantage of all the feature sets. For example, within Amazon, the different availability zones, the ability to create disaster recovery. So that versatility has enabled them to keep on air without having and being able to move operations, because it's all software based, to anywhere, any location around the world. So that's that versatility of being able to move your talent or your operational pool to work from home or anywhere else is very important. And now we're starting to see that from the other elements within the facility, which is production. And that's where you see Dreamcatcher kind of moving into the cloud, is taking those feature sets that I would typically have maybe on-prem and moving that, and then connecting them with JPEG XS for the ultra low latency components with RIST or SRT. So in the same things with mobile environments, if I need more replay channels, if I need more stuff, tap them into the cloud and then basically control them from that. So that's kind of that mindset shift, or that sort of change in the definition of what remote production really means. And lastly, this is where I think everyone is really going to start to push towards. Again, that whole ability to move away from just having everything going into a central location, but running it completely remotely. So taking a signal from a venue, processing it here inside oops. So taking the signals, completely do the full production here in the cloud. There's my map. So here, do the full production in the cloud and have operators work from home or geographically spaced areas, cross the LAN to control these different pieces, and do the full production completely virtualized. So no longer having them connect to something that sits on-prem, dedicated piece of hardware, to now something that is completely virtualized. And this is really the new definition of what remote production. And this is where the industry is now going to start to shift very quickly after this pandemic. That's it. Mark, do you have any questions or?
No questions from me here. Well, actually, I will have in a second or two, but I'm looking online. Sure. I don't see any questions from the audience right now. Give them about 15 or 20 seconds to
sure,
to kind of join in. I do have one on you. Let's get to when you're doing everything that's online. What are the sign-in possibilities? Do you work with Active Directory? Do you work with Azure, AWS? I know they're separate questions, but you know, can you use Active Directory to sign on in the cloud? And can you do single sign-on?
Yeah, so there is a level of Active Directory. So user management is a big part of this. But essentially what we see is an extension of what you would do within the facility. So Magnum, for example, in this case, our broadcast facility will provide that access, the user access. We extend that into the cloud, regardless of what platform it is.
And can you assign users based on their sign-in? So different users, different sign-in have different capabilities?
Yes, exactly. And that's actually the big aspect of, you know, that sort of piece that we've got with Vue and the versatility is that I can sign in as the engineer and I'll get access to certain controls. You may sign in as the TD and you get your own layouts and only access controls to certain sources and destinations. So that versatility of being able to change that interface based on the user, whether that's a sign in, you know, as a particular login with password, or maybe a badge or some sort of mechanism that identifies me versus you, that becomes an element that is essential to this.
Okay, here's a question that just came in. What kind of bandwidth requirements are needed for ADEM and some of the encoding and streamings that are created?
Yeah, so in terms of when we look at, you know, for example, with Vue Anywhere, and this is where I think this is that sort of key component there, is the fact that we're bringing the whole resolution right to you. So we're taking that output and basically encoding it out to you. So the bandwidth requirements is really, really low. You're talking about 5 to 10 megabits, if that, and really low latency in order to get that responsiveness of touching those surfaces. So that's kind of one of the big differentiators here, is that you're not decoding the stream in one manner. You're not then overlaying with the control surface. It's all being presented to you as you would have been if you physically connected to the device on premise.
This is Chuck. The example of the multi-viewer, Mo, from Comcast out in NBC Regional Sports, they're using 3 megabits, and the quality it looks just as good as the multi-viewer.
Yeah. Yeah, and then that's the thing, is that's where we, you know, one of the things about Vue that's been very interesting, and I think this is where we see a more willingness to have this conversation, is what it can do to your workflow and how you can present things. I think one of the things that we've learned throughout this transition IP and now out of this pandemic is you need to really go back and rethink the workflows that you want to accomplish, because the mindset or how you approach the problem is going to change. Meaning, I'm not going to be building necessarily a facility in which everyone's going to come to and we're going to do that, in which I'm going to have access to these great multi-viewer walls and everything else. How do I present the information that an operator needs to do their job from anywhere? And I think that's the big mindset change. And that's really where we start to think about, all right, what am I really presenting to the operator, right? Like, what's the purpose of the multi-viewer wall? Is that everyone has values. But if I give you that information to you right in front of you, do I need the multi-viewer, right? So I think that really is a combination of a multi-viewer and control and everything else. Visualizing that stuff, that becomes a mindset change. And I think that's really where a lot of new conversations are happening.
That's great. You did an excellent job presenting. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time and effort putting into the presentation there. It's a lot to think about, and we're moving in a whole different direction for for production here. As we move forward, what can be done live, what can be done on site, what can be done remotely, how best do we move to remote, and who should be on site, who should be remote. There's a lot of questions that this will bring up, and as we keep continuing as transitioning, and I guess I'd say much as I hate to say it, this new normal, I think it's making this whole industry rethink and how we use applications, how we use hardware, how we use software. What was not traditionally accepted is now becoming accepted, and taking that to learn how to move forward here. And you guys have done a great job presenting this and putting this in place, and let's see how we move forward here. It's great. It's a new technical world on here.
No, I agree. And I think that's been probably one of the biggest comments that I've heard over the last 8 weeks has been the pure joy of the engineering staff of, this is almost like going back to the old days. I need to stitch something together very quickly in a day to get things up and running. So, they were able to, again, surprise themselves and what they were able to accomplish very quickly. And I think that again, that sort of, if you take the safety net and this traditional thinking and have to think out of the box, it is, I think that's really what we're having, more conversations along that line of thinking out of the box and thinking about how to do things a little bit different, because we need to change it. And I think that emphasis, or that little push that we've had with this unfortunate pandemic, I think will do the industry, I think, a lot more, provide more value to the industry than I think, coming out of this than maybe some would think. So.
This is Chuck. If anyone has any questions later on, they can just reach me at chuck@evertz.com. Reading a couple of compliments to you, Mo. Greg Hecker from Comcast. So thanks a lot, Mo. It was really good.
Yeah, Mo, thank you very much for this presentation. Chuck, thank you for helping put it together so we can do this. Over the next month here, coming up in June, I hope to have a presentation on SRT, the SRT Alliance. I'm still working with those guys to put something together. It's very interesting, how we're moving forward with this. So if you have any suggestions that presenters or different parts of the industry you'd like to see, email me, email comments at phyllisempty.org, and let us know, and we'll respond, and we'll try to put together more webinars for you guys. We're all at home. We're all working remotely, and this is going to be, the new thing. So, we're here as Philadelphia SMPTE to, participate in, let's get everybody together and learn more about this industry. So again, Mo, thank you. Chuck, thank you. And signing off for today, and look forward to an email for a next upcoming webinar, hopefully from SRT. Take care, guys, and have a great afternoon. Enjoy the sunny day.
Awesome. Thank you. Take care.